Chapter 2. The Background of Communism. The breeding ground for international communism was spawned in a befitting mind and locale for such a diabolical conspiracy. The character and life of Karl Marx reflected well the nature and source of the totalitarian doctrines of communism. His outlook and disposition bore the traits of a revolutionary. He was opposed to everything and had only contempt for people as individuals. His own wife told him constantly that she would rather be in the grave than married to him. The history of this man reveals that he was a tramp and a vagabond who lived in dirt and filth. His laziness required that he live off of the fruits and labors of others, which is characteristic of the doctrine he advocated. He constantly sought ways and means of causing divisions, destroying things as they exist, and pulling down every form of law and government. Human liberty and free enterprise were his greatest enemies because he was creating the most dreaded dictatorship and slavery ever known to man. He called it communism. As wicked and atrocious as communism was, it gained many dedicated converts. In 1903, Nikolai Lenin and 17 other disciples of Marx established the Bolshevik movement in Russia, or the Communist Party as we know it today. Keep in mind that in 1903 there were only 18 communists in the Soviet Union. Today, over 1 billion people in the world are affected by this godless conspiracy. In 1917, with 40,000 supporters, Nikolai Lenin conquered the Soviet Union, a nation with almost 150 million people. By 1960, the party of Lenin had enslaved 1 billion conquered people and murdered 50 million or more in doing so. In almost a half a century, the communists grew from 18 to 1 billion, which is the most phenomenal growth of any world movement or political power in the history of mankind. It is no longer a question of will the communistic malignancy conquer the world, or can it conquer the world? It is conquering the world. Communist America, must it be? By R.J. Hargis, page 5. The basis of Lenin's communist doctrine is the belief that government can plan and direct the lives of people. The more control over the thinking and actions of the people by government, the more efficient and perfect they believe that government is. To believe in communism, one must surrender all liberty and free agency to the state. The state then becomes the owner and operator of every industry, farm, and business. Another communist doctrine declares that all religion, Christian, Judaism, Buddhism, or whatever is a fraud, a superstition, and dangerous to the communist philosophy. Therefore, the beliefs in the worship of the masses must eventually cease to exist under their control. Religion is the antithesis of communism. A disciple of communism is eternally at war. He must subvert, sabotage, infiltrate, and destroy all opposing forms of government, religion, or enterprise that stands in opposition to the communist movement. To win over ideas, individuals, or nations, the communist uses every conceivable tactic. Communist agitators use the worst of human intents and emotions to subvert people. Envy, hate, avarice, conceit, laziness, gluttony, lust, selfishness, hatred, and fear are imposed upon anyone and everyone. Many men in high government positions, top scientists in sensitive industrial positions, or even the shiftless and lazy, are bribed, blackmailed, bought off, or praised for enlistment into the red cause. The colossal myth, the paramount lie of these latter days, is the false notion that communists are exponents of a respectable political ideology susceptible to the controls of morality, decency, humanity. The truth is that communism is an international criminal conspiracy, larger in magnitude and more deadly than any organized crime syndicate. It is more treacherous than the legions of any known army. The leaders of communism are responsible for more mass murders, mass tortures of innocent people, and slave imprisonment of more nations than any other tyrants in recorded history. They are dedicated to the overthrow of every existing government on earth. The grand final objective and triumph is for the overthrow of the United States of America. In 1917, the Bolsheviks began the brutal revolution, which began with food riots in Leningrad, but innocently as it may have seemed, underlying cause was the revolutionaries. The results were the death of over 2 million people and the overthrow of the provisional government of the Soviet Union. With the discontent of the people through riots and the strikes, the Bolsheviks killed the Tsar and his family and within the year were in power. However, in a revolution, murder and slavery are part of a continual process of purification. By the time Stalin came into power, he was liquidating tens of thousands of his citizens. Under his rule, peasants by the millions, who refused to surrender their crops to the state, were forced into starvation. Slave labor camps were filled with political prisoners. The Kremlin tried to apply its doctrine of atheism by murdering thousands of priests and destroying many of their churches. Joseph Stalin killed millions of Russian people, but when Nikita S. Khrushchev came into power, He was not to be outdone, he therefore more than doubled that number. A befitting title was given to Nikita by his own people. He will always be remembered in Russia as the butcher of the Ukraine. Strikes, riots, revolution, anarchy, and then overthrow were the natural principles which elected the communists into power. When these tactics were not used, then the ballot of tanks and artillery put them into office. The grandiose doctrines of Bolshevism spilled over into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania by 1940. Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Yugoslavia, Tibet, East Germany, North Korea, North Vietnam, and China have all been baptized with blood into the congregation of the communists. In 1869, a young revolutionist by the name of Nechayer prepared a revolutionary catechism, which has been a foundation for all communist revolutions from that day until now. It illustrates how a few men can destroy whole societies and nations. The Revolutionary Catechism. The duties of the revolutionary toward himself. 1. The revolutionary is a dedicated man. He has no personal inclinations, no business affairs, no emotions, no attachments, no property, and no name. Everything in him is subordinated towards a single exclusive attachment, a single thought, and a single passion: the revolution. 2. In the very depths of his being, not only in words but also in deeds, he has torn himself away from the bonds which tie him to the social order, and to the cultivated world, with all its laws, moralities, and customs, and its generally accepted conventions. He is their enemy, and if he continues to live with them, it is only in order to destroy them more quickly. 3. The revolutionary despises all dogmas and refuses to accept the mundane science, leaving them for future generations. He knows only one science, the science of destruction. For this reason, and only for this reason, he will study mechanics, physics, chemistry, and perhaps medicine. But all day and night he studies the living science of peoples, their characteristics and circumstances, and all the phenomena of the present social order. The object is the same: the prompt destruction of this filthy order. 4. The revolutionary despises public opinion. He despises and hates the existing social order in all its manifestations. For him, morality is everything which contributes to the triumph of the revolution. Immoral and criminal is everything that stands in his way. 5. The revolutionary is a dedicated man, merciless toward the state, and altogether merciless toward the educated classes, and he can expect no mercy from them. Between him and them there exists, declared or concealed, a continual and irreconcilable war for life or for death. He must accustom himself to enduring torture. 6. Tyrannical toward himself, he must be tyrannical toward others. All the soft and tender affections arising from kinship, friendship, and love, all gratitude and even all honor must be obliterated, and in their place, there must be the cold and single-minded passion for the work of revolution. For him there exists only one pleasure, one consolation, one reward, one satisfaction: the success of the revolution. Night and day he must have but one thought, one aim: merciless destruction. Aiming and indefatigably toward this end, he must be ready to destroy himself and destroy with his own hands everyone who stands in his way. 7. The nature of the true revolutionary excludes all romanticism, all sensitivity, all exultations and enthusiasms. He must also exclude private vendettas and personal hatred. The revolutionary passion, practiced at every moment of the day until it becomes a habit, is to be employed with cold calculation. At all times and in all places the revolutionary must refuse to allow himself to be guided by his personal impulses, but only by the total submergence of himself in the revolution. Relationship of the revolutionary toward the revolutionary comrades. 8. The revolutionary can have no friendly feeling to anyone unless, like him, the other is dedicated to revolutionary affairs. His degree of friendship, devotion, and obligation toward a comrade must be determined only by the degree of the comrade's usefulness in the practical work of complete and destructive revolution. 9. It is superfluous to speak of solidarity among revolutionaries. The whole strength of the revolutionary work lies in this. Comrades who possess the same revolutionary passion should, as much as possible, deliberate all important matters together and come to unanimous conclusions. But the revolutionary, in accomplishing whatever plan is finally decided upon, must rely altogether on himself. The contract of revolutionary destruction demands that no comrades come running up with advice and assistance, if this detracts from the success of the plan. 10. Each comrade should have under him several revolutionaries of the second or third rank, i.e., comrades who are not completely dedicated. These should be regarded as portions of a common fund of revolutionary capital, to be expended as he thinks fit. He should expend them as economically as possible, always attempting to derive the utmost possible use from them. He should regard himself as capital consecrated to the triumph of the revolution, and he must not be regarded as expendable without the entire agreement of the fully initiated comrades. 11. When a comrade is caught in a dangerous extremity and the question arises whether he should be rescued, the revolutionary must make his decision without recourse to personal feelings, but only in terms of the eventual success of the revolution. Therefore, it is necessary to balance carefully the usefulness of the comrade insofar as it is a question of revolutionary strength, and the most careful consideration should be made to decide whether he is worth rescuing. Relationship of the revolutionary towards society. 12. Whether a new member, after giving proof of loyalty by word and deed, should be accepted is a matter to be decided only by unanimous agreement. 13. The revolutionary enters the world of the state, of the classes, and of so-called culture, and he lives in this world only because he has faith in its speedy and total destruction. He is not a revolutionary if he feels any sympathy for this world. He must not hesitate to destroy any position, any place, or any man in this world. All must be equally detested by him. All the worse for him if he has parents, friends, and loved ones. He is no longer a revolutionary if they can stay his hand. 14. Aiming at implacable destruction, the revolutionary can and sometimes must live within society while pretending to be other than what he is. A revolutionary must penetrate everywhere, among the lowest and the middle classes, and in the houses of commerce, in the churches, in the palaces of the aristocracy. He must know the world of the bureaucrats and of the military and of literature, and he must enter into the third division and even into the Winter Palace. 15. All the members of this filthy society can be split up into several categories. The first category comprises those to be condemned to death without delay. The comrades should compile a list of those to be condemned, weighing the relative gravity of their crimes against their value to the revolution, and the executions should be carried out according to the prepared order. 16. In the preparation of these lists and in placing the condemned according to the prepared order, no private sense of outrage should be considered, nor is it necessary to pay attention to the hatred provoked by these people among the comrades or the people. But hatred and the sense of outrage must to some extent be made use of, because these things help to incite rebellion among the people. It is necessary to be guided only by the relative usefulness of these executions for the sake of the revolution. Above all, those who are especially inimical to the revolutionary organization must be destroyed. Their violent and sudden deaths will produce the utmost panic in the government. It will shake the foundations of government and deprive it of the services of its most intelligent and energetic agents. 17. The second group consists of those to whom we concede life provisionally, in order that their bestial behavior shall drive the people to inevitable revolt. 18. The third category consists of a multitude of personages or animals distinguished neither for intelligence nor for energy, those who enjoy wealth, connections, influence, and power. These must be exploited in every possible way. They must be implicated and confused. As far as possible, their dirty secrets should be found out, so that we can make them our slaves. Their power, influence, and connections, their riches and energy, will form an inexhaustible treasure and a precious help in our various undertakings. 19. The fourth category is composed of ambitious people and liberals of various shades. We shall pretend we are following their ideas, and give them cause to think we are blindly conspiring with them, while in fact we take them under our own control. We shall root out all their secrets and comprise them to the uttermost, so that there will be no way out for them any they can be used to create disorder in the state. 20. The fifth category consists of doctrinaires, conspirators, revolutionaries, all idle word spillers who orate before meetings or in front of a piece of paper. They must be constantly driven toward making violent declarations carefully arranged to agree with our purpose. The majority of these will leave nothing behind, but a vast ruin. From a few of them, we shall attain real revolutionary gains. 21. The sixth category is especially important. Women. They should be divided into three chief divisions. First, those frivolous, thoughtless, and vapid women, whom we shall use as we use the third and fourth category of men. Second, women who are ardent, gifted, and devoted, but do not belong to us, because they have not yet achieved a passionless and austere revolutionary understanding. These must be used like the men of the fifth category. Finally, there are the women who are completely on our side, i.e., those who are wholly dedicated and who have accepted our program in its entirety. We should regard these women as the most valuable of our treasures. Without their help, it would be impossible to succeed. The duties of our society toward the people. 22. The aims of our society are none other than the entire emancipation and happiness of the people, i.e., the common laborers. Convinced that their emancipation and the achievement of this happiness is brought about only by means of an all-destroying popular revolt, we shall see that society will employ all its power, all its resources towards increasing and intensifying the calamities and evils until patience is exhausted, and they will break out in a levy en masse. 23. By a popular revolution, the society does not mean a revolution tailored according to the classic Western model, a pattern which is fundamentally restrained by the existence of property, and the traditional social orders of so-called civilization, has cast down one political form only to substitute another, thereby attempting to bring about a so-called revolutionary state. The only salutary form of revolution is one which destroys the entire state to the roots and exterminates all imperial traditions, the whole social order, and all the existing classes in Russia. 24. With this end in view, the society refuses to impose any new organizations from above. Any future organization will doubtless work its way through the movement and life of the people. But this is a matter for future generations to decide. Our task is terrible, total, universal, and merciless destruction. Straszno, polno, powszechne I bezpośrednio razruszenie. 25. Therefore, in drawing closer to the people, we must above all unite with those elements of popular life which from the very beginning of the imperial power of Muscovy have never ceased to protest, not only in words but in deeds, against everything directly or indirectly connected with the state, against the nobility, against the bureaucracy, against the priests, against business, and against the tight fist of the extortioner. We must unite with the adventurous tribes of brigands, who are the only true revolutionaries of Russia. 26. To knit the people into a single force which is wholly destructive and wholly invincible, such is our organization, our conspiracy, and our task. Red Shadows, page 11-16. The revolutionary will attract attention and gain followers by the illusion of false promises and vain prospects. Ignorant poor people are assured that come the revolution, they can virtually quit working and move in on the good jobs, the big houses, the best automobiles, and the prettiest women. Poor intellectuals are told that they will be brainy philosopher kings in the communist state. Timid wealthy people are urged to contribute to the Communist Party in hope of buying mercy from the Reds, which they won't get when the great day comes. Idealistic youngsters are occasionally attracted to communism as an alleged shortcut to the rubbing out of all the admitted evils and injustices in the world. Economic, social, religious, racial, and national groups are incited by communist agitators to hatred of one another. If you have any resentment on any score, just bring it to a communist agitator or propagandist, and he'll promise you a cure for your inward wound a day or two after the Reds take over. The Nature of the Enemy. By Ruben Mori, page 6. The conquering of nations by the Communist Party has not been done by the means of tanks and artillery as Adolf Hitler did. Nation after nation has crumbled from within through the undermining of red termites. After decaying the political, social, and moral structure of a nation, then comes the collapse through revolution and anarchy. Lenin could see no other position in conquering a capitalist nation than by violent revolution. In Lenin's book, The State and the Revolution, which has now become the world's most translated book, he said, "The supersession of the bourgeois state by the proletarian state is impossible without a violent revolution." This course of events compels the revolution to concentrate all its forces of destruction against the state power, and to set itself the aim, not of perfecting the state machine, but of smashing and destroying it. The State and the Revolution. 51, 35-51. Every principle and directive of the Communist Party is aimed at the revolution. Every minor chore or major riot is in the interest of the final revolution and overthrow of the government. Marx, Engels, and Lenin. Gloried in the prospect of the use of force. It is an action, not a reaction. They openly glorified violence as the instrument of progress. Revolution is the core of communist conquest. To them, a reformist, one who believes in the adequacy of reforms alone, is beneath contempt. As the student anticipates the day of graduation, as the bride looks forward to the day of her adorning, as the expectant mother awaits the hour of her deliverance, so, with flashing eyes and leaping pulse, the communist looks forward to that golden hour of the future, the day of revolution. Communism Diagnosis and Treatment, page 22. Through these insurrectionist methods, communists have also plotted the overthrow of this great nation. They openly boast that they will control the reins of government of the United States. The chairman of the Communist Party of America said, "When a communist heads a government in the United States, and that day will come just as surely as the sun rises, that government will not be a capitalistic government, but a Soviet government, and behind this government will stand the Red Army to enforce the dictatorship of the proletariat." William Z. Foster, Committee on Un-American Activities, 82nd Congress, First Session, page 4. All plans and efforts of the Communist Party are towards the goals of 1. Internal revolt, and then 2. Military conquest. For many decades, America has been a saving influence for the Communist Party. It would have died a natural death had not American intervention been the one factor to preserve it through economic, political, and military aid. Shortly after the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia in 1917, they sought American diplomatic recognition needed to give them respectability at home and abroad, and to make available credit for the import of foreign goods. Presidents Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover refused. By 1933, the Soviet Union was doomed. Stalin had murdered more than 6 million Russian farmers, and the starving population was ready for revolt. Hitler's Germany was a menace in the West, Japan in the East. Stalin stretched out his hands, red with the blood of millions, across the Atlantic, and Franklin Roosevelt grasped them in cordial friendship. It is improbable that the Soviets could have survived another year if Roosevelt had not given them diplomatic recognition in 1933. It is certain they could not have survived World War II without our help. Following the war, American policies and direct American aid helped communists conquer Eastern and Central Europe, and gave them China and Asia. Though China under Chiang Kai-shek was our most valuable ally in the Pacific, Roosevelt, at Yalta, agreed to Soviet control of Manchuria, a province of China. After we had beaten Japan without any help from the Soviets, Soviet armies equipped with American material occupied Manchuria. Before withdrawing, they gave Chinese communists enough American supplies to make war on our friend, Chiang Kai-shek. Communists and pro-communists in our State Department manipulated American decisions to favor the communists. The Dan Smoot Report. May 2, 1966, Vol. 12, Number 18. Very few Americans are awake to the subtle dangers of the Communist Party. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI said, "Communism is the deadliest danger of our civilization." American apathy assures itself that the communists are nearly all in Moscow or in the jungles of Vietnam, but the Kremlin has succeeded in enlisting, at a conservative estimate, more than 1 million Americans. There are at this moment the equivalent of some 20 combat divisions of enemy troops on American soil. Troops that are loyal only to the Soviets. Congressman Francis E. Walter, March 3, 1958. If there were any way to take an accurate census, it would show that there are more communists living in New York City than are living in Moscow. American Opinion, September 1958. If the communist cannot be detected by sight, his efforts can be determined. Every labor of the party member is directed for the objective of the revolution. The footprints of the Communist Party can be seen throughout the land of America. Their plans and their accomplishments are as easily discerned today as at any previous time. Rules for Revolution. On a dark night in May, 1919, 2 lorries rumbled across a bridge and onto the town of Dusseldorf. Among the dozen rowdy, singing Tommies apparently headed for a gay evening, were 2 representatives of the Allied military intelligence. These men had traced a wave of indiscipline, mutiny, and murder among the troops to the local headquarters of a revolutionary organization established in the town. Pretending to be drunk, they brushed by the sentries and arrested the ringleaders, a group of 13 men and women seated at a long table. In the course of the raid, the Allied officers emptied the contents of the safe. One of the documents found in it contained a specific outline of rules for bringing about a revolution. It is reprinted here to show the strategy of materialistic revolution and how personal attitudes and habits of living affect the affairs of nations. A. Corrupt the young, get them away from religion, get them interested in sex, make them superficial, destroy their ruggedness. B. Get control of all means of publicity and thereby 1. Get people's minds off their government by focusing their attention on athletics, sexy books and plays, and other trivialities. 2. Divide the people into hostile groups by constantly harping on controversial matters of no importance. 3. Destroy the people's faith in their natural leaders by holding these latter up to ridicule, obloquy, and contempt. 4. Always preach true democracy, but seize power as fast and as ruthlessly as possible. 5. By encouraging government extravagance, destroy its credit, produce fear of inflation with rising prices and general discontent. 6. Foment unnecessary strikes in vital industries, encourage civil disorders, and foster a lenient and soft attitude on the part of government towards such disorders. 7. By specious arguments cause the breakdown of the old moral virtues, honesty, sobriety, continence, faith in the pledged word, ruggedness. C. Cause the registration of all firearms on some pretext with a view of confiscating them and leaving the population helpless. From New World News, February 1946. With all of the information and plots which have been discovered, it seems very strange that the news media is so silent on the issues of communism. The Federal Bureau of Information and the House Un-American Activities Committee have been constantly discovering plots, murders, and conspiracies towards the overthrow of our country. But there are areas of news where important information is lying around for the taking with few takers. One of the prime examples is the downgrading by the major press of precise reporting and evaluation of available information on communist activity in the United States. It amounts to an unstated policy of protection of the subject from exact public scrutiny. American Legion, March 1970, page 52. Our civil laws should protect us from any such disaster. One such law is found in the U.S. Code, Title 18, Crimes and Criminal Procedures, Chapter 115, Section 2385. 2385. Advocating overthrow of government. Whoever knowingly or willfully advocates, abets, advises or teaches the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States or the government of any state, territory, district or possession thereof, or the government of any political subdivision therein, by force or violence, or by the assassination of any officer of any such government, or whoever, with intent to cause the overthrow or destruction of any such government, prints, publishes, edits, issues, circulates, sells, distributes, or publicly displays any written or printed matter advocating, advising, or teaching the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying any government in the United States by force or violence, or attempts to do so, or whoever organizes or helps or attempts to organize any society, group, or assembly of persons who teach, advocate, or encourage the overthrow or destruction of any such government by force or violence, or becomes or is a member of, or affiliates with any such society, group, or assembly of persona, knowing the purposes thereof, shall be fined not more than $20,000 or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both, and shall be ineligible for employment by the United States or any department or agency thereof, for the 5 years next following his conviction. If 2 or more persons conspire to commit any offense named in this section, each shall be fined not more than $20,000, or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both, and shall be ineligible for employment by the United States or any department or agency thereof, for the 5 years next following his conviction. As used in this section, the terms organizes and organize with respect to any society, group, or assembly or persons include the recruiting of new members, the forming of new units, and the regrouping or expansion of existing clubs, classes, and other unite of such society, group, or assembly of persons. June 25, 1948, ch. 645, 62 Stat. 808, July 24, 1956, ch. 678 and 270 Stat. 623, June 19, 1962, Pub. L. 87 to 486, 76 Stat. 103. In the course of a few years we have witnessed 1. The President of the United States murdered by a communist member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. 2. 54,246 Americans who died by communists in Korea. Hundreds more of our soldiers are still prisoners of the North Koreans. 3. America has sent $150 billion in foreign aid, trying to stop the forces of communist encroachments. 4. The average citizen crushed with taxations in support of our armies throughout the world. 5. Our gold supply has been diminished, our currency has become federal notes, and we are in debt to many, many nations. In practical terms, our monetary system is already insolvent and on the brink of bankruptcy. 6. Heretofore rioting has now erupted in the destruction of literally billions of dollars in Los Angeles, Harlem, Rochester, Chicago, Detroit, and other cities. 7. Student revolutionaries, anti-police, religion, law and all that is American, have become targets of this unseen power. 8. The Supreme Court has made it impossible for federal and state governments to prosecute communists, keep them off public payroll, or to compel them to register. Yet we are fighting them in foreign jungles. The policy of being soft on communism has not won us a single favorable influence with them. They still seek with even greater intent the overthrow and destruction of our free enterprise system. They are a class of people without standards, feelings, or understanding. A true representative of this outcropping is well expressed in the character of the head of the Communist Party USA, Mr. Gus Hall, who said, "I dream of the hour when the last congressman is strangled to death on the guts of the last preacher, and, since the Christians seem to love to sing about the blood, why not give them a little of it? Slit the throats of their children and drag them over the mourner's bench in the pulpit and allow them to drown in their own blood, and then see whether they enjoy singing these hymns." Gus Hall, at the funeral of Eugene Dennis, February 1961. The American communist is but little different from his brothers in foreign lands. Communism molds their nature into a force for destruction and atrocity. Any refugee from behind the Iron Curtain can testify of their tactics. Show scars of red torture. The Rev. Richard Wormbrand, with his wife listening, tells Senate Internal Security Subcommittee of tortures he endured while imprisoned by Romanian secret police. The Reverend Mr. Wormbrand showing scars he got while being tortured by Romanian secret police during 14 years imprisonment. Chicago Tribune, Saturday, May 7, 1966. By Willard Edwards. Chicago Tribune Press Service. Washington, May 6. A Romanian clergyman stripped to the waist at a Senate hearing today, and bared the scars he suffered from torture during 14 years of imprisonment under a communist regime. The Rev. Richard Wormbrand, 56, a Lutheran pastor who left Romania in December and came to the United States a month ago, disclosed that he had quieted 2 anti-war demonstrations by similar demonstrations. He told the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, with Thomas J. D. Kahn presiding, that B was bewildered by the pro-communist sympathies, especially among clergymen, that he had encountered in this country. Vitnik C. Scars, present at gatherings in Newark and Philadelphia, where anti-war demonstrators urged the United States to withdraw from Vietnam. He heard ministers and other speakers defend the peaceful aims of Red China in North Vietnam and denounce American intervention. Bearing the cuts and gashes on his back, chest, and abdomen, he quelled the audiences, he said, by stating, "I received these scars from the communist oppressors you are defending. I have seen many men die under torture, rather than turn against God and yield to atheism and communism. There can be no compromise with communism." The Reverend Mr. Wormbrand was a former representative of the World Council of Churches in Romania. He was imprisoned in 1948 for illegal preaching, released after 8 years, but imprisoned again from 1959 through 1964. When he was released the second time, his captors told him he could preach about Christ, but not against communism. Deplores church advice. "I came into the free world to find many clergymen voicing the same advice," he testified. "I found the World Council of Churches urging an end to attacks on communism. I am very sad. The church can never have peaceful coexistence with atheism. Communism is poisoning the minds of our children. I don't know politics. I cannot talk about the rights and wrongs of the war in Vietnam, but how can one forget the thousands of priests, nuns, and ministers who have been murdered in Red China? How can a minister preach that God is good, but refrain from preaching that communism is bad?" The Reverend Mr. Wormbrand described the methods of torture in prison. He and many others were locked in windowless dungeons for as long as 2 years in solitary confinement, he said, released only for questioning for 17-hour periods, during which they were beaten with whips, slashed with knives, or hit with iron rods. They were required to chant endlessly that communism is good, or Christianity is dead, and often given drugs to induce confessions, he said. Speaks for martyrs. "I speak for all the heroes and saints of the 20th century at Catholics, Protestants, and Jews who died under torture for their religion," he said. "I don't boast of these marks upon my body. I show you the tortured body of my country in my church. I saw a Catholic priest die, boasting that a pope would never shake hands with a communist. I am glad he does not know it has happened." The Reverend Mr. Wormbrand quoted the prison commandant in Bucharest as addressing the prisoners in this fashion: "You fools. You expect the Americans to come someday and release you. They are coming now to do business with us. If you beg Americans to help you, they ignore you. If you insult them, they help you. 1. D. O'Flaherty, a Washington businessman who accompanied the Reverend Mr. Wormbrand, said the witness's life had been threatened and asked Dodd to provide federal or police protection for him. Dodd said he will discuss the request in executive session. I am under God's protection, commented the Reverend Mr. Wormbrand. Many at that time were kidnapped like this. A van of the secret police stopped in front of me, 4 men jumped out and pushed me into the van. I was taken away for many years. For 8.5 years, no one knew if I was alive or dead. My wife was visited by the secret police who posed as released fellow prisoners. They told her they had attended my burial. She was heartbroken. Thousands from churches of all denominations went to prison at that time. Not only clergymen were put in jail, but also simple peasants, young boys and girls who witnessed for their faith. The prisons were full, and in Romania, as in all communist countries, to be in prison means to be tortured. Tortures have sometimes been horrible. I prefer not to speak too much about those through which I have passed. When I do, I cannot sleep at night. It is too painful. Very soon, another book of mine, Christ in the Communist Prisons, will appear, in which I will recount with many details all our experiences with God in jail. Unspeakable tortures. A pastor by the name of Florescu was tortured with red-hot iron pokers and with knives. He had been beaten very badly. Then he was put in a cell. Starving rats were driven into his cell through a large pipe. He could not sleep, but had to defend himself all the time. If he rested a moment or closed his eyes, the rats would attack him. He was forced to stand for 2 weeks, day and night. The communists wished to compel him to betray his brethren, but he resisted steadfastly. In the end, they brought his son of the age of 14, and they began to whip the son in front of the father, saying that they will continue to beat the child until the pastor says what they wished him to say. The poor man was half mad. He bore it as much as he could. When he could not stand it any more, he cried to his son, "Alexander, I must say what they want. I can't bear any more your beating." The son answered, "Father, don't do to me the injustice to have a traitor as a parent. Withstand. If they kill me, I die with the words Jesus in my fatherland." The communists, enraged, fell upon child and beat him to death with blood spattered over the walls of the cell. He died praising God. Our dear brother Florescu was never the same after seeing this. Handcuffs were put on our wrists which had sharp nails on the insides. If we were totally still, they didn't cut us. But in bitterly cold cells, when we would shake with cold, our wrists would be torn by the nails. Christians were hung upside down on ropes and beaten so severely that their bodies swung back and forth under the blows. Christians were put in icebox refrigerator cells which were so cold frost and ice covered the inside. I myself was thrown into one with but very little clothing on. Prison doctors would watch through an opening until they saw symptoms of freezing to death, then they would give a warning, and guards would rush in to take us out and make us warm. When we were finally warmed, we would immediately be put back in the icebox cells to freeze over and over again, thawing out, then freezing too within just 1 minute or 2 of death, then being thawed out again. It continued endlessly. Even today sometimes I can't bear to open a refrigerator. We Christians were put in wooden boxes only slightly larger than we were. This left no room to move. Dozens of sharp nails were driven into every side of the box, with their razor-sharp points sticking into the box. While we stood perfectly still, it was all right. We were forced to stand in these boxes for endless hours. But when we became fatigued and swayed with tiredness, the nails would go into our bodies. If we moved or twitched a muscle, there were the horrible nails. What communists have done to Christians surpasses any possibility of human understanding. I have seen communists torturing Christians, and the faces of the torturers shone with rapturous joy. They cried out while torturing the Christians, "We are the devil. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers of evil." We saw that communism is not from men but from the devil. It is a spiritual force, a force of evil, and can only be countered by a greater spiritual force, the Spirit of God. I often asked the torturers, "Don't you have pity in your hearts?" They usually answered with a quotation from Lenin, that you cannot make omelets without breaking the shells of eggs, and that you cannot cut wood without making chips fly. I said again, I know also this quotation from Lenin, but there is a difference. When you cut a piece of wood it feels nothing. But here you are dealing with human beings. Every beating produced pain, and there are mothers who weep. It was in vain. They are materialists. For them nothing else than matter exists, and a man is for them like wood, like an eggshell. With this belief they sink to unbelievable depths of cruelty. The cruelty of atheism is hard to believe. When man has no faith in the reward of good or the punishment of evil, there is no reason to be human. A boy dies at the Berlin Wall. The boy lying here, in the shadow of Berlin's Wall of Shame, is 18 years old Peter Fechter. On August 17, 1962, he and a friend tried scaling the barrier to freedom. Peter's friend escaped, but communist gripos, or border guards, gunned Peter down. For nearly an hour he moaned and called for help, but no help came. The gripos made no move. While hundreds of onlookers watched agonized from each side of the wall, he slowly bled to death. Pastor Han Junmying told of his escape from red execution. He and hundreds of fellow prisoners were forced into caves over the bodies of murdered comrades. Each man was shot in the head. However, Pastor Han was miraculously skipped. He escaped 3 days later when the entrance stone was dislodged by an Allied bombardment, and lives to testify of these commonplace atrocities. The bodies of 300 enemies of the people were removed from caves near Hamhung, Korea. The victims died of suffocation after the communists forced them into caves, and then sealed them off. The influence of the communists and their dupes in this country is well reflected in their activities. They openly boast of their strength, and are able to use our own methods to beat us. They may well be the voices behind the scenes which keep telling us that there really is no viciousness or threat in communism. Cultural Trends, by Avis Brick. According to the Brothers Grimm, there was once a shepherd boy who so loved excitement that he was forever turning in false wolf alarms for the fun of seeing the villagers come running to the pasture, armed with clubs and guns to deal with a wolf. As time went on, and no wolf was ever there when the villagers arrived, fewer and fewer of them answered his calls for help, and finally, when the wolf actually came, no one at all paid any attention to him, and the wolf ate him up. If the Grimms were collecting folk tales today, they might find a story that goes like this. Once there was a shepherd boy who was so afraid of having enemies that he refused to believe that wolves existed at all. When the wolf made off with one of his flock, he always managed to think of some likely sounding story with which to convince himself and the villagers that no wolf had been involved. The wolf grew strong and commenced to raise a family, and the shepherd boy got better and better at inventing stories to account for the diminution of his flock, so that pretty soon no one believed in wolves any longer, and the wolf and his cubs could walk through the village streets without fear of being recognized. If the story were carried to its logical conclusion, the ending would be far worse than that of the original tale. For if the wolves were smart enough to realize that the shepherd boy was the best friend they had, they could pull down all the sheep, and indeed all the villagers, as hunger decreed. All they would have to do would be to save the shepherd boy until last, for he would always find a way of convincing the survivors that there were no wolves. Indeed, I suspect that he would be telling himself the same thing, even while the wolves were dragging him off to their lair. There are wolves aplenty in the world today, and our government and our press and our halls of learning are literally full of shepherd boys who cannot allow themselves or anyone else, if they can possibly help it, to believe in wolves. Unlike the shepherd boy in the story, they are willing to admit that Soviet Russia once was somewhat carnivorous, but they insist she has filed down her fangs and become a vegetarian. 12 years ago, that particular wolf devoured one of its victims. Russia invaded Hungary and brutally crushed its people. The free world stood in horrified paralysis and watched, unbelieving, and no one lifted a finger to help. Since then, Russia has been involved in many coups and attempted coups among the developing nations. American troops have been killed by Soviet guns and bombs everywhere they have fought in the last 20 years. And once Russia went so far as to indicate quite clearly that the United States was on her list. Russian missiles aimed at the industrial and population centers of the United States were installed in Cuba. But our shepherd boys keep telling us how friendly are Moscow's intentions, how good-hearted are the people of Russia, how much the Soviet government has mellowed over the years. Now, once more, one of the civilized nations, Czechoslovakia, has attempted to free itself of its bondage to Moscow, and has been crushed under the tanks of the Red Army. The Czechs, knowing that there was no hope of assistance if they rebelled forcibly against Russian rule, knowing that if they were to stand at all, they would have to stand alone, used no weapons but their courage. We may never know just how bloody the crushing of the Czech rebellion was. All we know is that it is not over yet, and that Moscow, with its enforced trade and tribute agreements, will be chewing the bones of that gallant nation for a good many years to come. It happened again and again. We stood helplessly by, watching in disbelief. And before the corpse of that battle for freedom was cold, some of our shepherds were busily explaining that it didn't mean a thing, that Russia was not going back to her old habits, that the ruthless suppression of Czechoslovakia had nothing to do with Russia's international policies. Hatred for America and its principles of liberty is one of the major marks of communists in Russia, China, or USA. America is the prime target for a communist revolution and overthrow. 1. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, said, "It is indeed appalling that some members of our society continue to deplore and criticize those who stress the communist danger. What these misguided authorities fail to realize is that the Communist Party, USA, is an integral part of international communism. As the worldwide menace becomes more powerful, the various communist parties assume a more dangerous and sinister role in the countries in which they are entrenched. Public indifference to this threat is tantamount to national suicide." FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, March 1960. Know your enemy. Picture.